jurisdiction.
We unfortunately have to leave the conversation there, but Ambassador, really interesting discussion with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for more on the ICC decision, I spoke to Ambassador John Bolton, the former U.S. National Security Advisor in the Donald Trump administration. Ambassador, President Biden today called the ICC's decision outrageous and added, quote, whatever this prosecutor might imply, there is no equivalence, none, between Israel and Hamas. What's your reaction to the president's statement today?
Well, I think the ICC as a whole is fundamentally illegitimate. It sits untethered out in the international ether with no accountability, no democratic control, no executive or legislative checks. And I think it's a danger to the United States or any democratic rule of law state. It's a mistake for Biden to say they're prosecuting good guys and they should only prosecute bad guys.
Some of the U.S.'s strongest allies, including the U.K., are party to the ICC. And the U.S. has indeed in the past supported some of the ICC's work in looking at some alleged war crimes. We've seen this from both Republican and Democrat administrations. And in fact, the ICC issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader of the war in Ukraine. So what makes it illegitimate?
Well, it's true that some administrations, mostly Democratic, have provided support. I think that's a mistake for the United States. What's illegitimate is that this court has no separation between its prosecution and its judicial powers. That's something that violates a fundamental tenet of the American Constitution. It has no provision for jury trials. But most importantly, it's a pretend court. It doesn't have the support of an executive that makes political decisions, as occur in democratic societies. It doesn't have a legislative branch that, in the case of the United States, approves nominees to the federal judiciary. This is a court just out there with no power to enforce its decisions. It's an exercise in virtue signaling.
What avenue do you see then for pursuing international war crimes? We do know that the president here in the U.S. has also indicated that if it is found that Israel has committed violations of humanitarian law, that should be tried in Israel itself. Are you confident that that would happen?
That's what being a democracy is. If you don't understand that, I really don't know how to answer your question. We have democratically elected, constitutionally based governments. If those governments make mistakes, it's the responsibility of the people of the country through their legal process to call those officials
I'm just raising the point that the prosecutor made here.
And I'm telling you that a group of judges who are picked by an assembly of state parties purely on a political basis, who have no democratic accountability at all. This court is fundamentally contrary to democratic theory. It has no external checks on it whatsoever. And let me give you a concrete example from the court's action by calling for these arrest warrants. The war is ongoing. This prosecutor has no political accountability for the effect that he has just had on the war itself. Do you think this makes this conflict easier to resolve now or harder? Do you think more people might not die now because this war is extended? I think the answer to that is almost certainly yes.
We're going to hear more from Ambassador Bolton in a moment as we turn to our other major story. Iran has set a date for fresh presidential elections in June as the country holds 5 days of mourning for President Ibrahim Raisi, who was killed in a helicopter crash on Sunday. Iran's foreign minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian and 6 others also died. The crash happened close to Iran's border with Azerbaijan in a remote and mountainous area. While the cause remains unclear, officials say the chopper was experiencing difficulties with heavy fog and rain before the crash. Our chief international correspondent Lise Doucette has more.
In the fog at first light on this forbidding terrain, the crash site was finally reached, and the bodies pulled from this wreckage, including President Raisi and his foreign minister Abdullahian. A journalist from Iran's state TV reporting from this scene, the blue and white tail fin behind him. No one survived when this helicopter came down in the mountains of northwest Iran, killing 8 people on board. They had flown in a convoy of 3 choppers close to the border with Azerbaijan. President Raisi inaugurating a new dam. The Azeri president, Ilham Aliyev, says he bid him a friendly farewell. In Tehran today, a sad goodbye, the grief of his faithful flock. And on social media, scenes of sorrow, but also celebration. The BBC's Persian service, which can't report inside Iran, has been monitoring the messages.
They see him, they call him, he is the president of the poor people. But the reality is, if you look, mass majority of Iranian, we know what we are hearing from inside Iran, and those people who dare to come on social media and express their opinions, we see there are huge numbers of people are expressing their excitement. He's dead.
On President Raisi's watch, Iran cracked down on unprecedented protests, a new generation lashing out against strict Islamic rules restricting their freedoms. His sudden demise won't change Iran's direction.
It's a big mistake that Western governments, they rely very much on people hostile towards Iran for their analysis and for their information. And that's what makes them pursue mistaken policies that only backfire.
In the Islamic Republic, the 85-year-old supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is the ultimate authority. Raisi was seen as his possible successor. The hardliners control all the levers of power. As they start the process to select a new president, continuity is their top priority. Lise Doucette, BBC News.
A deputy to Mr. Raisi, Mohammed Mokhber, has been appointed as interim acting president, and replacing the foreign minister will be Ali Bagheri, a veteran nuclear negotiator who had been serving as deputy foreign minister. Authorities say the funeral procession for President Raisi will be held in Tehran on Wednesday. Reaction and condolences have been pouring in from around the world, from Turkey to the United Nations Security Council, which held a moment of silence in remembrance of President Raisi. Here in the U.S., State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said, quote, "The United States expresses its official condolences. As Iran selects a new president, we reaffirm our support for the Iranian people and their struggle for human rights and fundamental freedoms." White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby also commented, saying there is no question this was a man who had a lot of blood on his hands. Well, Ambassador John Bolton also gave me his reaction to the death of President Raisi. He wrote on X on Monday that Mr. Raisi's death doesn't mean that it's the end of the war against Israel. He explained to me why he thinks it might actually make the Iranian regime more aggressive.
The death of President Raisi is a potentially catastrophic blow to the rule of the Ayatollahs, not because of the power of the president, but because Raisi was being groomed as a potential successor to Supreme Leader Khamenei. There have only been two supreme leaders since the revolution of 1979. There's no constitutional process there either. So the loss of Raisi throws a monkey wrench into their succession planning and could be a symbol of the beginning of fracturing at the top of the regime, which could lead to the overthrow of the mullahs entirely. So I think one way to distract the population from the trouble at the top, common to authoritarian societies, is to point attention elsewhere. And the Iranian regime could do that by stepping up attacks on Israel and other allies of the U.S. through those proxies.
Iran has indicated that we'll hold elections next month. What do you think we could expect from whoever might be the next president?
Well, I don't expect that the Guardian Council will allow any candidates for president who don't adhere to the Ayatollah Khamenei's hard line. The real question is whether elections take place and whether they have any significance. I don't think you can cover up this hole in the middle of the body politic in Iran, and that's why the danger, the risk to the regime is so serious.